I may have come in with too high of expectations. This is your spoiler warning because I'm going to dive deep into this one. So let's start from the beginning here and state the obvious. This movie is extremely late. Development of the film began as early as 2004, however it wasn't possible to really do the movie until 2010 due to the rights and the way that the MCU phases were playing out. This movie, however, happens to be the first film of Phase 4. It has been preceded by 3 easily successful television shows, but this was a big step for the MCU, especially post-corona. Scarlett Johansson's Black Widow first debuted in 2010 alongside a well-received Iron Man 2. She was a much different character back then, and Johansson confirms that. I'm actually partially okay with this movie dropping in 2021 compared to the 2010s because of what her character was like previously. She's grown a lot. She started off as the male fantasy sexy spy, and by Avengers Endgame, she's the de facto matriarch of the team. The weird thing about the Black Widow film is that it actually takes place in not quite the middle, but more towards the end of the transition. The events of the movie take place immediately after the events of Captain America's Civil War, in which she attacked the King of Wakanda, definitely didn't sign the Sokovia Accords, and helped Steve and Bucky get away. Standing in her shoes, this is a critical point of the film. Family. Her Avengers family has fallen apart, and now she's about to get into a situation with her previous family. If you have seen the previous MCU movies where Natasha discusses her past, she often mentions getting rid of the red in her ledger, which is some vague language basically saying that she has to make amends for what she previously did and feels guilty about her past. This film is supposed to detail the process of doing that, and it does, but not by Natasha's willingness to do so. It comes by coincidence when Taskmaster decides to attack her for the vials. Now the connection is that her sister sent them to her, but this kind of kills the plot point that had been building for years, and it doesn't come back really until Natasha makes a play for the Red Room and uncovers Taskmaster's identity. Brushing that aside, Black Widow manages to feel like the third act in the trilogy of films that never occurred, and it's dissatisfying. The sunset panning shots, the family coming together, the sister bond appears to lose its emotional effect because 1, this character is dead in the series, and 2, you have no emotional connection to Yelena, Melina, or Alexei because it's the first time you've seen them on screen and the depth is just not there. Black Widow felt like it should have been the swan song for this character that they had no plans to resurrect under Scarlett Johansson, and for some terrible reason it isn't. It's a Marvel movie that fills in a piece or two, but in my opinion does not do this character any type of justice that she deserved. That's an extremely bold claim I'm making because Johansson herself has an executive producer credit on the film, but even her presence cannot affect the overall writing of the film, which is strangely inconsistent regarding its tone for an MCU film. The intro to this film is insane. It's easily the best intro for an MCU film, period. It feels like the intro to a badass spy movie. The opening credits give me Zack Snyder's Watchmen vibes. This is hands down the best soundtrack that's ever been in an MCU film. Someone was channeling their inner Hans Zimmer. Just listen to this. As good as the opening is, compare that to the Fast and Furious vibe you're getting towards the end of the film when you're watching Natasha fight in the middle of the air. It's a cool scene, but somehow in the world of aliens, demigods, and infinity gems just feels a little too over the top. Even if that doesn't bother you, it's a completely different theme from start to finish. The beginning of the film makes you believe that you're about to watch a gritty film that dives deep into the darkness that is Natasha's life, and you do, but there feels to be a lack of commitment to stay in and show the darkness because it's an MCU film with a family tone to it. It's hard to verbalize, and honestly upon hearing this video it may come off as general hating. But it really feels like I started watching Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight and it transitioned into Batman Forever. 2 good movies in their own right, but 2 very different tones and themes in movies. I feel like the writers had a hard time deciding if this should be a MCU humble beginnings film, a film about family, a film about Natasha's past, or just a serious spy film that deals with human trafficking. It manages to be about all of those things, but not in a manner that's impressive. It's okay. Black Widow isn't bad by any means. The plot is solid once you understand Natasha's Red Ledger journey is one of happenstance and that it will lead her back to her first family and eventually her Avengers family. Somehow I feel like there was not enough hand-to-hand combat scenes like the Winter Soldier had, but this is more of a personal preference. There are plenty of things blowing up and awesome chase scenes. Taskmaster is a thrill to watch. Yelena's character absolutely steals the show. She has this pseudo role of the bratty little sister, and the chemistry between her and Natasha is fantastic. The primary conflict in the film is that the Red Room still exists and Dreykov is somehow still alive. This angers Natasha, and she seeks to finish what she started. Again, less of that guilty clear my ledger vibe and more of just a straight vengeance vibe. She happens to drag her family along the way, and her family gets put back together. That sounds cool, but she did not set out to do this and did not actually facilitate it. It's their will to stop the Red Room that does. Is that bad writing? No, not at all. But is that bad writing for this character based on the way she developed during Avengers Endgame? Absolutely. Easily the most frustrating part of this movie is the long-awaited sunset scene. You've seen it dozens of times in the trailers, and this happens to be the scene where Natasha is apprehended by Ross and his men. This is another critical connection to the MCU because at some point she breaks out, meets up with Steve to help break out other Avengers, and somehow it was decided, instead of placing this scene in the film of how she escaped Ross not once but twice, to instead time skip over the entire event and have Natasha and Mason set up for a pretty lackluster callback from earlier in the film and have her fly away in the Quinjet. I think I would have let that slide if Natasha was the one that actually shows up at the end of Civil War at the prison, but it's Steve. Sure, she could have been in the background somewhere kicking ass, but one, I shouldn't have to assume that, and two, that's the whole point of a solo movie. The post-credit scene is good. Valentina continues her Nick Fury-like crusade of recruiting whatever team she's putting together. I assume the Dark Avengers, and we'll get an anti-hero kind of team up, which may be cool. Yelena appears to be already working for Valentina and will likely be the next Black Widow, but not for the Avengers because she's hunting Hawkeye, but the Dark Avengers. Get it? Evil Captain America, evil Black Widow, we'll see, I guess. Or it's probably the Thunderbolts, I don't know. Also, I hope you didn't come prepared to find out what happens between Natasha and Clint during the Budapest incident, because they will not tell you. Honestly, this might be good because often the mystery is better than the answer, but man was I pissed when it was not brought up. I won't ding the movie for this, but come on, Marvel. But overall, for this movie, it has some really good aspects to it. Fun to watch, great soundtrack, good characters, decent plot, but to me it feels like the third act of a film trilogy we never got. I would have taken an entire film that dealt with Natasha's origin from being abandoned, the first Red Room run-through, the Ohio Chronicles, and her second run-through of the Red Room. I would have taken a second film that showed Natasha at her prime widow prowess, with S.H.I.E.L.D. offering her a way out as she was mentally struggling to be free of Dreykov, ending with the events of her killing Dreykov and his daughter to be free. That would have been a wild end to that film. Can you imagine that? And then the third movie being this film, Natasha coming full circle with the family that you met in the first film and the resurgence of Dreykov in the Red Room, which you thought was gone, all while still hitting on those notes of family, human trafficking, and everything else crammed into this film. This movie is late. This movie does not do the entire character of Black Widow justice because there's no way that you don't agree with me that this character, similar to her male counterparts minus Hulk, deserved 3 movies. Black Widow doesn't feel rushed. It's not that it doesn't feel like an MCU movie regardless of how the opening was. It simply feels like the bar was not met. The bar was very high for this film, and honestly I think they missed it. That doesn't mean that the movie isn't good. It is. But short of calling it an absolute truth, it could have been easily much, much better. 7 out of 10 on the official Black Man's Log scale. I know I'm going to get some hate for this one, but I feel like Natasha deserved a little more, and I think you agree with me.